Thank you, Rose, for the presentation. I'm happy to be here. And I'm going to present to you guys some preliminary results from this research that we call Benevolence and Universalism, a Sustainable Entrepreneurship Mindset Trigger on Undergraduates, a Cross-Cultural Study. So we also have one of the co-authors of this research, which is Diana. Thank you, Diana, for being here. So, Goal 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals calls to ensure that every student acquires the necessary skills and competencies to promote sustainable development, including sustainable lifestyles. Just to have this in mind, because we are going to talk about educating for a sustainable mindset. So what we found in the research, literature review, is that these elements for a sustainable mindset: systemic attention, innovative, and the dimension of being. So when connected to emotions and personal values, systemic thinking and environmental education can create a powerful transformation in our worldview, leading to more thoughtful and compassionate behaviors for the benefit of all. As such, the development of this lens not only contributes to leadership behavior committed to sustainability, but also to shaping a better world. This is what the literature review tells us. But in practice, when we interview entrepreneurs that do have in their business model some actions for sustainability, some practices, we found that behind these actions are their own values, their own context. Probably these values were generated in their family context, but in other times is the school, the universities, the context that they were referred to that build these values. So, and this is the framework of innovative and collaborative action. And as you can see, values are in one of these dimensions, as knowledge, values, and competencies. They build each one of these dimensions. So at CEEC, we did try to match all of the projects and initiatives and courses that were built all over the years that match each one of these areas. As you can see, we have courses like the Human and Sustainability class, which is a 7th semester class, and some of these programs are from students like Terra Vita, which is a students organization, and the Zero Waste Project, which is an institutional project that now, through the sustainability class, we ask students to have that project in their own home. So these are all the initiatives. I'm pretty sure there are more, but this is the ones we knew of at the time of the research. So a sustainability mindset is defined as a way of thinking and being that results from a broad understanding of the ecosystem's manifestations, from social sensitivity as well as an introspective focus on one's personal values and higher self, and finds its expression in actions for the greater good of the whole community. So in this Schwartz value structure that came up in the 90s, there are two values that are linked to a sustainable mindset. They are in the self-transcendence spectrum, and they are universalism and benevolence. Benevolence is preserving and enhancing the welfare of those with whom one identifies personally. And universalism is the understanding, appreciation, tolerance, and protection for the well of all people in nature. So since we are a business school, we have a big challenge, and that is to nurture these values into our students, so when they go out to their ventures, they do these practices in their life.
in the context. So values do matter concerning sustainable, focused entrepreneurial activity. Since these mindsets can be developed, business schools key challenge, well, I'll talk to you about that. It's all of these pedagogical strategies and all of the programs and initiatives to nurture these values. So business can be a force for good, make positive difference, positive social impact, and there's a big challenge, integrating these into curricular programs. So our research question is, what are the differences in the core values profile between undergraduate, freshman, and senior students under different cultural contexts? And well, the objective is to statistically measure the differences between the Hamill values profile of freshman and senior undergraduate students by evaluating the relative importance of the values of the self-transcendent spectrum, universalism, and benevolence as triggers of the sustainable entrepreneurial mindset. So the other objective is to have this comparative analysis of undergraduate students from a Mexican university, which is CEEC, and a Czech Republic university with one of our partners in this research project. So we use the same instrument, the portrait value questionnaire from Schwartz, but in the case of Mexico, CEEC, we use the one validated for the Mexican undergraduate population, and in Czech Republic, we use the one validated by the European Social Survey in 2020. So we have a sample of 236 students. 55% of them were freshman students, and 45% senior students. And with our partners, there were 288 students surveyed, 53% freshman students and 47 senior students. So we are going to see first the preliminary results. And what we did is a hierarchical organization of the 10 values. So in CEEC University, freshman students' core values are universalism and benevolence are on third and fourth place of their profile. But in senior students, these two values move up the scale to first and second place. We want to think, or we tend to think, that this is evidence that something happened with the programs and initiatives that our school has to engage students in these practices. And in the case of Silesian University, we found that we're very happy to find this, that benevolence is leading their profiles for values, and universalism is in third place on freshman students. But on senior students, we found that universalism moved up the scale, so that it's evidence that the same thing could happen. But what is intriguing to us is why benevolence is in the first place, and it has to do with probably with context. So our preliminary conclusions are that senior undergraduate students of all universities have the values of the self-transcendent spectrum in the same position of their respective core values profile. And well, this is a quick definition. Differences are found in freshman students' core values profile of undergraduates of both universities. Might be different cultural contexts, differences on sustainability development report. We're still working on those conclusions since we finished the European survey in February. So just to give some context to this, well, we want to see the big spectrum first. So as a country, Czech Republic is third place in the Sustainable Development Report. It's the index that comes up every year. So it's in third place. And quality of education is evaluated as challenges remain. In the case of Mexico, we are the number 7 in the rank, and well, quality of education, significant challenges remain. And well, so far, that is all we have for context. We're still working on this, but I think we're going on the right track to see the whole picture first. And thank you very much for your attention.
it's really powerful to be here today, and I'm especially excited about this research that I'm embarking on, and it's just super critical. I've been able to work with entrepreneurs, micro-entrepreneurs especially, micro-entrepreneurs, 0 to 5 employees, and I've seen some really powerful things happen in the U.S. And then I had an opportunity to look at some international spaces and see the power of entrepreneurship as well. So I want to set us up with this premise that there's an incredibly frightening and staggering growing population of women incarcerated. And this is not only happening in the U.S., it's also happening in the countries that I've been studying in this, as I've started down the pathway of this research. And the part that's really disturbing is that there's this huge sense of urgency. I have a cough drop off because I'm getting over bronchitis, and that cough has a long tail. So, there are so many people under carceral control. If you think about it, as many as 100 million Americans. 1 in 48 people have a criminal record. That's pretty significant. And the U.S. is one of the largest jailers, and the thing that's very troubling, and why I put that statistic there, is because the U.S. is also training other countries to incarcerate. So the country's worst jailer is now teaching people how to run their prison systems. So it's extremely frightening. And to make things even worse, this work is extremely more difficult when it comes to women. Incarceration is difficult in general, but when it comes to women, it's incredibly difficult. In the U.S., many of the women who are incarcerated are caregivers for their families, and they're often single parents. In the countries that I've studied in Africa, there's also significant roles that the women play, and there's significant stigma, which I want to speak to in a bit. So the poverty is more significant, the unemployment is more significant, the homelessness is more significant. And I set this up, this sense of urgency, the difficulty for women, to really show the power of entrepreneurship as a viable solution for the work. So if we look at these trends and the growing population in Nigeria, Kenya, and Uganda, we can really see what's happening from some of my conversations there has just been the criminalization of poverty, which is happening abroad. And the thing that was especially disturbing is the level of dehumanization happening to the women that are incarcerated in these countries. And so I put these notes, like in Nigeria, there's this unbelievable level of control that happens in the prison systems and in the prisons that we were able to visit in Lagos. And I put the stick here because in Kenya, some of the corrections officers will use a stick in order to, exert control over the women who are incarcerated. And then in Uganda, it's so disturbing because the women, when they approach authority, they get on their knees and approach. So in addition to the stigma, which I'm going to talk about, the dehumanization is incredible, and the criminalization of poverty. And you can see these upward trajectories for these prisons. It's really quite unbelievable. And it's simple things like you are, they call it a hawker. So you're selling small goods, you're selling nuts or juices, but you don't have a license. Or maybe you've gotten a license, but you've gotten an incorrect license. So now this is a crime because you don't have a license or you've gotten an incorrect license, and now you're incarcerated. And because you don't have the U.S. equivalent of the $10 to pay the fine, you have to sit in the prison until they decide what's to be next for you. So it just really creates the sense of urgency on why entrepreneurship is incredibly important. And then I put this slide here because even though the growing rates are tremendous in the countries, in the African countries that I have been looking at, it pales in comparison to the U.S. But it's still very disturbing as you see the growth of the prison population rate growing significantly, but still pales in comparison. So when you see these economic cooperatives, it's essentially these micro entrepreneurs working together, learning from each other, and trying to build their businesses. And this is an example of one of those groups in Uganda. It's really quite inspiring and humbling and amazing. And stigma adds this real additional, this dimension that is unbelievable. So if you are incarcerated in the countries that I've been studied, the family will immediately turn against you. It is as if you've brought significant shame to the family. And so there's a shunning that happens. The husband will leave the family, will remarry and leave the children from that marriage behind. It is unbelievable when you hear the lived experiences of the women talking about, even if they were unjustly accused or if they were innocent, the fact that they've had to go into this prison pathway, the stigma remains with them. It's very difficult for them to reunite with their children. Families want to take their rights away for access to their children. And then the community itself will turn its back, like you've brought shame to the community. And in Kenya, there's an additional depth to it. So in my interviews with entrepreneurs in Kenya, there's an economic piece. So in the US, we have the ban the box. And sometimes that's the thing that prevents formerly incarcerated individuals from accessing jobs or housing because people can see that they. In Kenya, there's an equivalent of you have to get a work certificate. But if you've been incarcerated, you're not eligible to receive a work certificate. So now you can't access any traditional jobs because you don't have the access to the work certificate because you've been incarcerated. So there's another economic dimension in Kenya that is really making it very difficult for the women to be able to provide for themselves and their families. So there's significant economic consequences and in the US and abroad, in unemployment, in poverty, in food insecurity, housing insecurity, sleep insecurity, these barriers around transportation, and just plain lack of access to resources. This is true. And the pieces that have created some real powerful energy is this, that formerly incarcerated individuals are more likely to become entrepreneurs than those who have never been incarcerated, and to be successful at this entrepreneurship piece. Entrepreneurship is such it has the potential, a bounty that many of the women who have been incarcerated have not really thought about as a pathway for, reclaiming your space or reuniting with your family or having some economic sovereignty. Entrepreneurship is such a powerful, holds so much powerful potential for formerly incarcerated women. And really, the barriers, it's very similar to the barriers that our micro-entrepreneurs have in the US. Specifically, this limited training, this limited access to training is a barrier. What could happen if we provided some fundamental entrepreneurship training? It completely can be a game changer. This absence of networks, people who look like you, who want to do the work that you want to do, who understand the economic conditions that you have to navigate through, who understand the stigma that you have to work through, extremely powerful when you can pull it together. And of course, the lack of financial capital. And the thing that's most interesting about this barrier when you're thinking about the countries that I have been studying is that they're minimal. Imagine what $1,000 might do for one of those entrepreneurs. Is incredibly impactful. So, and the thing that I think that was also powerful in the work is because this work was done in connection with a US organization, the doors we were able to open were extremely significant. Because we're from the US, we could, get meetings with the prison officials and the prison commissioners, and they were paying closer attention because a U.S. organization was interested in what's the destiny for the women. So, okay, good. Okay, good.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that powerful presentation. A lot to think about there, and thank you, Sylvia, for showing us some of the conclusions on your study and lots of interesting and positive directions there. I'd like to turn it over to questions now. Yes.
Thank you, Sylvia and Dr. Madden.
Yes, thank you.
have a question for Dr. Madden. One of our peers did a study on formerly incarcerated and entrepreneurship and how to build that mindset. One of her key questions and challenges she posed was, what do you feel is the best attack point? Is it integrating at the point of incarceration, or is it upon reentry?
I love that question. It is, honestly, it depends. If you can get access to the women while they're incarcerated, and there are universities who've been able to tap into prison training programs, and the Pell Grant is now being made available for, justice impacted youth and adults who are incarcerated. If you can tap into and provide some entrepreneurship training while the women or whomever are incarcerated, what an incredible thing to do. You have the gift of time. Time is the only non-renewable resource. And if you're sitting there incarcerated, serving your time, and you could learn more about being a high-impact entrepreneur, building some entrepreneurial skills, then yes. And then when they get out of prison, the access to the networks and the capital become the piece. So the three skills that you need won't change. How you can deliver them can be the power. So the training you can start to deliver while they're incarcerated, and then the other resources that will be life-changing you can deliver once they are released.
Other questions?
Hi, this was very great. I have a question for Dr. Madden as well. When you were looking at the profile of the women that are incarcerated, did they have a pre-entrepreneurship type profile, and then they were incarcerated, and then I'm wondering, is there research or anything that comparing that to the U.S.? Are the women going into the U.S. background in entrepreneurship and then coming out and doing it, or what's the landscape around that? Thank you.
I love that question. I'm going to tell you that much like the U.S., entrepreneurship is not, much like the U.S. for under-resourced communities and, there's my timer, so, is that families are not discussing entrepreneurship at the table. Entrepreneurship is seen as an opportunity to create a life that you want to have for yourself and your family. So I don't think individuals, I think that they had entrepreneurial characteristics. I think that they had entrepreneurial mindsets, but they didn't have to apply those things in that way. But when you think of, one of my favorite words from my doctoral program is bricolage. And the bricolage are people, and people who practice bricolage are called bricoleurs. It's the ability to create something from nothing. And I think that entrepreneurship becomes the way forward because people have to create something from nothing. They don't have the employment opportunities, they're experiencing homelessness and poverty. What is it that they can do to use their skill set for good and to, again, reunify them with their families and reintegrate them back into society? So it's not been activated yet, but I think it's in there.
Yeah, I've got a question for Sylvia about the study there. I thought it was interesting showing at how some of those elements became more important, but what struck me when I looked very quickly at that is the hedonism, hedonism was number one, I believe, in the Mexican one, and it dropped to almost last. And it seems to be that's almost a more significant finding than what moved up, is the fact what moved down. And so I'd like to kind of address that one a little bit. And the other thing, too, that you kind of jumped over, I think, very quickly, but I'd like to hear more about is the idea of spiritual intelligence and how that might be taught and maybe coming out as part of the family system or the religious system within Mexico, and how that plays into this result.
I'm happy that you mentioned that about hedonism. Yeah, we did. We see that also, but since the research is about these other two values, right now that's what we are presenting. But you are totally right. That is very important because it means that it give us more elements to think that the other values are in the first places of the scale, and what will be the outcomes of that. It will mean that people more engage with community in the context of their business activity. And the other part of the spiritual intelligence, well, definitely will come from the family context. But throughout, for example, classes or courses, we also discuss these ideas with our students, no? What is the differences between doing positive impacts in people, and what is the outcome of negative impact, no? And so that comes, it's all mixed. It's hard to just speak with students of spirituality or other. We tend to speak of the whole thing. So that's why we categorize some of our programs and courses in that dimension also.
Thank you. This question is for Sylvia. Can you shed some light on the on-the-ground activities or programs or specific, I don't know, like an MVP exercise or something that drove the orientation to things like benevolence and universalism? Give us a view into some of the programs you had listed. Por favor,
okay,
please.
The main course, which is Human Being and Sustainability course, we, as I mentioned, the Zero Waste Project, which is an institutional project, is now a home project that students do during the course, the semester that they take this class. So we orient them so they can put this Zero Waste Project in their own houses. But one of the other activities is that we visit a native community in Valle de Guadalupe, which is very close to Ensenada, and they do walk around the community, they engage with people, they hear from their experiences, they hear from their native ways of looking at the world, and about the medicine that they practice, no? This, all of their own resources. So that is one kind of activity that will impact, for example, that spiritual intelligence and the others too. So those are two of the activities. We try to engage students outside the classroom with these activities. I think those are good examples of it. Mm-hmm.
Sylvia, thank you. That's really profound. And I'm kind of looking for ways to do that in my university. And I'm just, I'm wondering, like, how you got started with that. And, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like it's that engagement, that direct engagement with the community that is so profound for them when they're talking to people. So how would you advise some of us to get started with something like that?
Well, knowing your community, as Michael Morris just said, engage with the community, go out and see what's around us. This is one thing, but we can also talk about orphanages or parks that need to be restored. In our community, there are a lot of things like that pending to be done for someone to take the initiative to do that. So starting with that, and I think in our school, there's an institutional project for sustainability. So that also speaks of other. And I don't know if Diana wants to add something. You want microphone? So.
It's okay. Everybody can hear me?
Yeah.
It's about the engagement with the community. We also have, as a part of the curriculum, 500 hours of mandatory
That's right.
volunteer program. So what
Love
the
that.
students do within a class, and all the students, regardless of the program, are participating in this. So what the students do in this walking through the community is they identify projects that will help underserved communities to improve their conditions.
I see.
So each student, they form teams, they make a pitch, they make a pitch during the class, and then the whole class choose 4 or 5 projects, and they work on that project for the whole semester, and this happens at least once a year. So we reach all the cohorts, all the programs, and this is also helping with
Thank you, Diana.
Thank you. And I just
Great.
want to say one other thing. So the information about the incarceration of women in the prison systems in the United States and then, globally and how we're teaching others. Thank you for sharing that. I did not know that. I'm horrified. And just very interesting. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Very impactful.
This is really for Jennifer. I'm just familiar with a prison program in North Carolina. Have you heard of Brian Hamilton Foundation? I want you to be sure. And what he does is he goes into prisons and he teaches the incarcerated men that volunteer. They have to volunteer for the class, entrepreneurship, and they've had some successful startups. He's been doing it about 4 or 5 years, but you can Google brianhamiltonfoundation.com, and I think he's based in Raleigh. It's in North Carolina.
Excellent. I'll definitely follow up on that. And the thing that's incredibly interesting is that there are, yes, limited resources, but much more significant, maybe 4% of the resources for formerly incarcerated resources are for women. There are far more resources available for men, and mimicking resources and projects that work are extremely important, because we can take something like the Brian Hamilton Foundation approach and then apply those wins to women who we know from Grameen Bank research and how much more impactful it can be. So thank you, I appreciate that.
He might even help fund you because he was very successful in .com.
Mm-hmm. I'll be in touch with Brian Hamilton.
Hey, sorry, I caught the tail end of it, but for the stats on women, I want to know if you're doing anything in the States currently around it, but also a few years ago, I helped to launch a program called Defy Ventures. I don't know if you ever heard of Defy. The founder of Defy started, it was around 2011 in New York City. It's now nationwide, and it's basically an entrepreneurship program that we helped launch in New York, but it's gone way bigger now. But they work in prison and outside for reentry, teaching entrepreneurship, et cetera. So I was wondering if you had interacted with them along the way at all in all of this, and also, if there's any other additional things you're doing, in the States around helping women who come out of prison.
So thank you for that question. It has been a really interesting journey. The way that I was able to even tap into the women who have been incarcerated abroad is a strategic point of entry in connecting with a woman. Her name is Susan Burton, and she is the founder of a reentry project called A New Way of Life, based out of Los Angeles. And her approach is to create safe houses. And this is just a reentry model that she's built and has fidelity that really does work to help women reenter successfully into society. It starts with housing, some workforce development and supports. And so one of the things that I have been in discussions with Ms. Burton around is how can we expand these workforce supports to include entrepreneurship? And so she has several safe houses across the US, and she is just starting to build those safe houses internationally. So she has homes in Nigeria, Kenya, and in Uganda. This is how I was able to have access. And imagine if we could add entrepreneurship to this workforce development portfolio, viable strategies that we know that work, we can immediately have a scalable impact for women reentering society. And so what we're trying to create is she has this idea around a safe university. So if you're in the Safe Housing Network, then you could have access to these entrepreneurship training courses, learn how to, we're on the cusp of doing something really incredible, so.
Hey, since we're talking about North Carolina, I think there's a lot of programs that I've heard of, but they're grassroots. They're not the sort of things that are centralized, because I know in Wilmington there's a very successful program that was put together for reentry of previously incarcerated people, and he teaches entrepreneurship and talks about a lot of stuff that you talked about. But one of the things he does too, and he realized this maybe 10 or 15 years ago, is that when you talk about women, you had to have a safe house.
Yes.
And so unlike the men, the women's side of this particular facility is a dormitory. They can bring their children in and that sort of thing, but it's a combination of entrepreneurial training with safe house for women, which was different from the men. He found he didn't have to do that for the men, but definitely for women. So I think there's a lot of pieces like this probably scattered around, but it's very grassroots oriented.
And the reason that I think it has to be is just it creates, you're able to build so much credibility when you look at it from like this bottom-up approach. And so the thing that, one of the reasons that Ms. Burton's, empire is so powerful is that she is formerly incarcerated. And to build from nothing is an incredibly impactful way to demonstrate that it's possible. We're making things visible, which is a design thinking caveat. And so I just love when we recognize these academic concepts in communities, and again, in some different research with entrepreneurs in South Africa, one of the most powerful quotes from one of those interviews was that language enables you to see, not to speak. And so we're able to bring into these grassroots communities this language around entrepreneurship that allows them to see opportunity, to see themselves, to see the world differently, and a place where they can be reintegrated and be successful.
Wow, fantastic. I had a question. I'm interested in your inspiration for starting this research. Was it, from the doctoral conversations around building something from nothing and going, who has nothing? And let me start there, but what was your inspiration?
So if, I think it was for sure Susan Burton and my work. So I've always done work in under-resourced communities, always around building pathways to economic development. And if we can find ways for the least of us to be successful, then this is a way that we can ensure, the best of us as possible.
Thank you. About 5 minutes, so if we have any additional questions or follow-up questions?
And for the women formerly incarcerated, the importance of their families and friends, you particularly mentioned in Africa, the shunning that takes place. Are there any strategies that have been successful in bridging that problem?
Yes. So in the U.S., the ability to create community, and that can be mimicked and is mimicked in the African countries that I've studied, and the community is now a chosen family, in that the women, for example, in Kenya, they have all had the same traumatic experience, but have been able to make it through. And so now they have this kind of shared experience and understanding and support. And when you're able to be a provider, this is the power of the entrepreneurship. Then you're able to find a voice. If you're not able, so your housing piece, you don't have to go back to this abusive situation, but you're able to have economic sovereignty. That's when you can start to bring your family together. That's when you can start to make up for your absence. That's when you can start to provide guidance and wisdom that help other community members, to take a different pathway forward. So community is especially important, and sometimes it's not from the community that we're born into, but the ones that we create, that there's a shared life experience or some empathy or support for your success. People co-conspiring for your success.
Well, thank you. I think it looks like we had so many great questions and discussions, 2 very powerful presentations from 2 very powerful women. I feel like I want to punch the sky and say hallelujah, just because we've had just a great discussion in here. I think the presentations are always just the jumping off point to just really digging into things. So I look forward to stalking you to coffee or something else like that. But thank you so much, everyone, for your time in here. And I think we'll close the session for today. Thank you.